Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Adrian Panda, business and immigration attorney, and today I'm going to talk about the K-1 visa interview. So before we go any further, let me sort of give a little bit of background and explain, which part of the process we're going to discuss here. So the K-1 visa is a fiancé visa, right? It's the visa issued to fiancés of U.S. citizens who will then enter the U.S., get married to the U.S. citizen, and apply for permanent residence. So in this video, I'm focusing strictly on the K-1 fiancé process, and within that process, just the interview. So just to recap the process, generally speaking, right, the fiancé in the fiancé visa process, the first step is to file a petition with USCIS, the K-1 petition. Once that is approved, the case gets transferred to a U.S. Embassy consulate for visa processing so that this K-1 fiancé visa can be issued. After all the documents are transferred, the critical step in the K-1 visa issuance process is this interview. It's the final step. The applicant has to go and show up for an interview, present relevant documents, and thereafter the visa can be issued and the applicant can travel to the U.S. to be with their U.S. citizen fiance. So, regarding this interview, right? First, before we even get into what's going to happen on the day of and the questions and all of that, the very first thing you have to do is you have to get prepared, right? So there's a lot of documents you have to bring to this interview, and you should get them organized, neatly organize them in a package so that you're ready to present your case to the officer. So what goes into this packet and what should you bring? Your best guide is going to be the interview invitation letter that the consulate or embassy sends you. Generally, those emails say, hey, you've been scheduled for an interview, this date, this time, this location, bring all these documents. We'll go through that list, treat it like a checklist, and make sure everything is there. Don't blindly follow videos like this one. Although the requirements are the same generally, there are unique requirements country to country occasionally. Follow what the consulate is communicating to you rather than what any general video like this one is communicating. But that being said, let's go through these documents sort of one by one that you generally have to bring. So you're going to have to bring your copy of your passport, right? Your physical passport, because that's where the visa is going to be, that's where the visa is going to get stamped into, right? You're going to have to bring generally 2 US-sized passport photos so that it's part of the visa processing so that they can issue the visa. You should bring your birth certificate. If you've ever been married before, you should bring a divorce decree or a death certificate, just proving that the previous marriage lawfully ended. In addition to that, you should bring proof of payment of any relevant visa application fees, as well as proof of the DS-160 confirmation code, because you have to submit this DS-160 application so that your K-1 visa interview can be scheduled. So bring proof of your DS-160 application processing page, right? The confirmation page that you submitted that application. In addition to that, you generally want to submit a Form I-134. That's technically called affidavit of support. It's basically that the U.S. citizen petitioner, right, the U.S. citizen fiance, is able to support you if needed in the United States. With that form, you will also need to submit relevant tax and financial documents. So just make sure you have that. And then in addition to these, generally you have to get a police clearance, military clearance, and a medical exam that you have to submit at this interview. The military clearances and police certificates, they really vary country by country how difficult they are to obtain. My advice is the moment you're scheduled for an interview, make sure you have these, get on these immediately, because sometimes it takes weeks to obtain them. And then the medical exam, you're going to have to go to a physician that's actually approved by the Department of State, and you can find them online, and also usually the interview invitation letter says who these physicians are, and then you can go to them prior to the interview, obtain the medical, and generally speaking, the information gets transferred directly from the doctor's office to the consulate. So you don't really have to do much besides just confirm that you attended this medical exam and that it's fully done and that there's no inadmissibility issues because of anything that came up on that medical exam. But basically, you will take all these documents, right? And you will neatly organize them in a package. Now, there's a couple things I did not mention that also need to go into this packet of documents.
Most importantly, proof of the relationship and proof that you have physically met in the last 2 years with your U.S. citizen fiance, because that's a requirement. So generally speaking, photos, trips taken together, any sort of communication, it could be text messages, WhatsApp, whatever, FaceTime, just proof if you've seen each other's families, etc., but basically proof that this is a valid, real relationship, and then some proof that you've actually seen each other in the last 2 years, physically present in the same place is what you have to prove. Now, you may be asking, hey, we already submitted all this with the petition. Why are we bringing it again? I tell everyone simply so that the consular officer can make this determination too. At the end of the day, they're the ones issuing the visa. The more you can show that this is genuine, it's real, you're doing the right thing, following the rules, the more likely the officer is going to want to approve this case and move on and allow you to enter the US. So I would bring this evidence. The other part of the evidence, which I already mentioned earlier, is this I-134 form, and it's proof of the U.S. citizen petitioner's ability to support you in the U.S. I don't want to go into too much detail here, simply because you can use joint sponsors. If the U.S. citizen petitioner's income doesn't qualify or is below the thresholds, it's not the end of the world. There's ways to get around that. It would be a totally separate video in which I can go over that. So I don't want to go into too much detail here, but the bottom line is you should bring proof of financial support from your U.S. citizen petitioner. Now, let's talk a little bit about the actual day of the interview. So what I tell everyone is don't stay up till 5 a.m. reading random questions online and stressing about this, right? Get a good night's rest before. In the morning, make sure, if you drink coffee, drink coffee. If, you eat breakfast, make sure you eat breakfast. Generally speaking, I tell everyone to eat because you don't know after you enter the embassy consulate how soon you're going to actually be called for the interview. So the bottom line is be well rested so that you can be in a good mood, right? Because it goes a long way. I think a lot of these cases, a lot of this comes down at the interview on presentation. If you are in a good mood, you look good, you put out good energy, people are going to treat you nicer generally, right? So that goes a really, really long way. Similarly, make sure you dress nice. I always stress this. It's a serious process. It's a formal process. These are government officers in these buildings, right? So you want to look the part and treat the process with the relevant respect. And then final point related to all this, which is general, before we go into some of the questions, is be, professional and respectful to the officer. Because at the end of the day, they have a tough job, right? Like they're whole for hours, they're talking to people, making very critical decisions, who to let in, who not to let into the country. So the last thing you want to do is be unprofessional or impolite, right? So just treat them with respect and answer all questions respectfully. And I think if you do what I said here, right, you're going to present really well, and they're going to see that, hey, this is a nice person, let's give them the visa and let's give them the opportunity to live in the US and with their US citizen fiance. So this is general advice, but I think it's super, super important. One quick tip, which I forgot to say about dress code, you're going to go through a metal detector sort of security going into the US consulate or embassy, right? So make sure don't wear anything that has a lot of metal, jewelry, whatever, additional things that may be an issue if you're going through metal detectors. Like think of it as like the airport, right? So you want to dress in a way where you don't have to take off a bunch of the clothes that you've put on, and so that you can go through the metal detector without any issues. So that's just a tip, because I've seen issues with that. And also technology. Generally speaking, you can't bring laptops, big bulky cameras, etc. into the consulates. So just probably don't bring those. You can check each consulate that has this information online, and they say, hey, here's what you're allowed to bring, here's what you're not allowed to bring. But generally, I tell everyone, don't bring all that extra technology. There's no need for it. Just bring the relevant evidence, right? The documents we discussed earlier, and nothing more bulky. You're not going to be doing anything on your laptop in there, so there's no point to bring it. Okay, so let's talk about the questions at this K-1 visa interview now. The first line of questioning that you can anticipate are related to the relationship, right? How did you meet? How does the relationship evolve from meeting to actually applying for a fiancé visa and getting engaged, right? What was the proposal like, etc. You should prepare, and be able to describe the sort of the history of the relationship. A couple of points I want to make here. You're not required to have a formal proposal, so it doesn't have to be, diamond ring in the park on one knee. That's not a requirement, but you have to be a fiancé, which by definition means that there's a proposal of some sort, even though if it's not the most traditional one, the way it's displayed in most movies. So you should be able to answer questions about the proposal, but don't be alarmed if you didn't have the most standard of, proposals that you see in your average Hollywood movie. Similarly, don't be alarmed if you met online or if your relationship isn't, again, like the most standard one and that there's unique parts to your relationship. I tell everyone, I've had clients who met playing video games. I've had clients, meet in the most interesting places and under the most interesting circumstances. And that is fine. The question isn't, do you have the most standard everyday relationship? The question is this a real relationship and are you really engaged, right? So just know that, but you shouldn't be afraid if part of your story is not completely standard at all. You just should be able to explain it so that the officer can understand it. Then a next line of questioning is just, there is a requirement that you have actually physically seen each other in the last 2 years, right? So there may be questions of when was the last time you met? Where did you meet? Did you travel somewhere? Did they visit you? How did you meet the last time? This is a question that could definitely come up simply because it's a requirement. Then the rest of the questions may have to do with the applicant's background, right? So they will go into where do you work, where have you lived, give me your address, etc., etc. And these go more to sort of double checking and verifying for security reasons someone's background, right? To make sure that visas are not issued to individuals, who have done questionable things in the past and who the U.S. government wants to keep out of the country. These questions, they may be slightly invasive, right? Because they may be asking you, hey, what about, what did you do when you lived at this address? What did you do in this job that we see listed here? What about this other address we found related to you? That's done basically to make sure that there's no, background security related issues, right? So just answer those questions. And as always, right, be truthful. You're under oath in there. You have to be truthful to the officer. Two things I want to highlight regarding these background questions, right? If you have any prior visa refusals, immigration violations in the U.S., you have to be honest about them. Don't think you can hide them. If you hide them, it's going to be way worse. If it comes at some point, they will come out later in life, and it's going to be nothing but trouble after that. So, if you've been refused a visa, first of all, it's not the end of the world. It becomes more complicated if the refusal was for certain reasons that render you inadmissible. If all you did was apply for, say, a tourist visa and your visa was, not issued because they thought you may, overstay that visa and they thought that you were a risk to overstay the visa, just disclose it. Just because you were denied one visa doesn't mean you're going to get denied this one. Each visa is considered on its own as an individual application. So it's not the end of the world, and you should freely be able to disclose those. Now, if you've been, if you have immigration violations inside the United States, or you've been refused a visa for other more serious issues such as crimes or other violations or things you have done, you should probably consult with an immigration lawyer, because in that case, there has to be a strategy. You could be walking in, to put it bluntly, into a field of landmines and problems if you're not well prepared and you don't have the relevant arguments, like especially with criminal backgrounds, etc. But if you don't have any of those, and it's just, for example, a simple tourist visa denial because many years ago, then you should always feel open and should disclose those to the officer. And like I said, you should disclose everything, not just those, but if it's more serious issues than that, to reach out to a lawyer who can assist and prepare a strategy in those cases. So in addition to immigration violations and refusals, the other big one is criminal issues. So if you have a criminal record, if you've ever been arrested, especially if you've ever been to prison, anything drug related, but just generally speaking, if you have arrests, and I'm not talking about $150 or the equivalent of $150 speeding ticket, but genuine, arrests, convictions, charges, make sure you speak to a lawyer prior to the interview, because those could render you inadmissible. Again, if it can be overcome, a lawyer can prepare a strategy for you, the relevant documents can be presented, and that way the visa can get issued. Again, just like with the violations, like the immigration violations and refusal, be truthful, never lie. Even if you never spoke to a lawyer, you shouldn't be lying at these interviews. It could mean significant, massive consequences, right? And it could be considered misrepresentation and fraud, which could genuinely keep you out of this country for a lifetime. So just to summarize this, right? Criminal issues, immigration issues need to be disclosed, and you should probably be talking to a lawyer to have a good strategy in hand for those. Then finally, after all these questions, at the end of the interview, right, the officer will generally tell you what the next step is, whether it's approved, etc. But if not, right, so if the officer doesn't say anything, you should ask, hey, officer, what is the next step? What can I anticipate? When will you issue an answer? Or if the officer gives pushback and says, look, I can't issue this visa today, I need something else, or I can't, I'm going to be refusing this visa and I'm going to be denying your case, ask why and ask what you need to submit. I say this to all my clients. I need to know how I can cure the case, right? Like, I need to know what documents we need to present. Obviously, you want to be with your U.S. citizen fiance, so make sure at the end of the interview you ask, what the next steps are, and if there's anything else that needs to be done. If the case is not approved, what you can do to change the officer's mind and get the visa approved. And that's really it for the K-1 visa interview and related questions. I'm sure you're anxious. It's completely normal, right? Everyone's anxious walking into a government building, talking to government officers. But I tell everyone, also find some excitement in this, because it is the final step. Generally, after this interview, you will be issued the visa and you can finally move to the U.S. to be with your U.S. citizen fiance. So while a stressful process, I understand it should also bring a level of excitement. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did like the video, please hit the like button and please follow the channel, and I'll try to post more similar content. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.